We're only a few days in and already we've got controversy. This is today's Arsenal transfer show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal transfer show. Joining every morning, usually at 8 a.m., I admit, and this is a first really. I mean, I'm usually known for being late. 10 minutes early this morning, 10 to 8 today. Thank you to those joining me. Apologies for the slight late start. Apologies to those that are tuning in at 8 thinking, I've missed the first 10 minutes of the show. I've got an appointment pretty early on this morning, so I didn't want to leave you without a show. So I decided I'd start this one 10 minutes early just to give me a little bit more time, give you some more show as well, because I'm probably going to head off about 1:15 this morning as well. So yeah, just there you go. That's the reason as to why I'm doing the show slightly early this morning. But good morning to you all. Thank you so much for joining me and for tuning in. You got a show today, you got a show tomorrow. I did forget to mention this. I'm on a stag do this weekend. You remember that I said I can't go on the tour this summer because I'm at a very important wedding of which I'm the best man. I also forgot to mention that this weekend, which was the Champions League final, which was, of course, a little bit of the whole, if we did win in Paris, I would have ended up missing my friend stag do because I would have been at the Champions League final. But with us not in the Champions League final, I am indeed away this weekend. But do not worry, do not fear. You're going to have content all over the weekend. I recorded a fantastic episode yesterday with a good friend of the show for Saturday. I'm recording another one for you all on Sunday with somebody who's very much in the know about things. So looking forward to that. So yeah, you'll have a show on Saturday and a show on Sunday, despite me not being here, not letting you down, even though we don't have the ability to do the show live. But good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you joining us. Thank you so much to the chat box for tuning in. Rich, Matt G, Lee, Tabani, Simple Unity, Stevie. We've got Jackson and Barry. We've got Knowledge and Glenn, Steve and Paul. We've got Loga and Stephen, Rob, Mr. Ree, and plenty more of you guys and girls in the chat box as well. But let's not waste any more time. Let's jump into today's stories. And we begin with yesterday's overlap episode that released. Thierry Henry speaking on the overlap and pulling no punches, it would be probably fair to say, on the show. I wanted to talk about what I thought was fair from the interview and what I thought was not necessarily as accurate and more just kind of shot taking a little bit. So I think what he discussed surrounding trophies, the fact he said we've not reached a final in 5 years, not lifted a trophy. I mean, that's fair. I think Arsenal have to a degree underachieved, in those 5 years. Not lift a trophy in 5 years from a silverware perspective, from a finals perspective. In 5 years at Arsenal, having won the FA Cup in 2020, we would have hoped to have lifted something. I don't think there's anything wrong in saying that the hopes would have been that Arsenal would have done more in these 5 years, got to at least another final, hopefully have lifted another trophy. We've not done that. There's been reasons. We can talk about the broader context of that as we usually do, of course. So I didn't really have too many issues with that. Arsenal have, of course, put themselves back into contention with titles and stuff. I was listening to Harry Symeou talking on TalkSport this morning, and I think he raised some fair points about the idea that, yes, we've not won a trophy, but if Arsenal won the Carabao Cup next season or just the FA Cup next season, I still think people would be critical of Arsenal. I still think that people would be frustrated with that outcome. They want more. They want titles. They want Champions Leagues. And that's what Arsenal are building towards. They're building towards trying to win Champions League, building towards trying to win the title. And as a result, I think that has affected, obviously, our competitivity in those competitions. That said, we've still reached the semi-final of the League Cup twice. We've, of course, progressed through to those latter stages of the Champions League last season in the semi-final, getting knocked out, of course, against a fully fit PSG when we're lacking so many key stars. So I didn't really have too much of an issue with that. The bits I did take somewhat of an issue was some of the inaccuracies in how he spoke about the summer of last year. There's no doubt that the summer of 2024 was not good enough. Arsenal failed. They didn't add the players that we needed. But there was insinuations made that Arsenal signed Raheem Sterling instead of a centre-forward, like it was a decision to sign Sterling instead of signing a centre-forward. That isn't the case. That isn't what happened. And of course, also there was kind of mention of the injury situation. And I think he used the term, it's on the staff, or that's on the staff. And he talked about the training camps and doing cold baths and training well and not getting players injured as if like that's a choice. I found that a little bit off key, to be honest. I've no issue with the competitive stuff, the trophy stuff, the final stuff. I think that's fair. But the injury stuff, saying that's on the staff and effectively insinuating that mistakes are being made causing these injuries, I think just feeds something of a conspiracy theory that's just not there. Arsenal last season were very good when it came to availability of players. I'm struggling how you can go from having a season where injuries haven't really been a factor to one, obviously, where we've had more bad luck when it comes to injuries, which do snowball. When you lose players in a certain position, that starts to snowball. The issue, to be fair, he said, like, it's on the staff in terms of recruitment and recruitment only. I would have been like, that's fair, because the fact that we didn't sign enough players in the summer definitely contributed to the injury risk increasing. But he didn't, because he started talking about cold baths and training and things like this. So there was clear insinuation there that when he said it's on the staff, he was talking about coaches, medical teams, things like this, analysts, whatever, not just the people behind the lack of recruitment that we had or didn't have last summer. So they're just opinions. And I'm disagreeing with something that he said and agreeing with other parts that he said. But that's kind of where I'm at. But let us know where you're thinking on that front in the comment section as well. Moving into the transfer news specifically, Martin Zubimendi, lots of news that dropped yesterday surrounding him closing on the announcement, of course, as an Arsenal player. I did do a little digging around this. It seemed talk of a medical might be a little bit too soon, too premature, but we're certainly heading in that direction, is the indications that I've got. And of course, he will have to complete a medical before signing for Arsenal. We hope that kind of in this earlier kind of transfer window that opens in June, between June 1st and June 10th, we might see the announcement. That'd be great. I think that'd bring a real lift. And the indication, of course, that Arsenal doing things very quickly at the beginning of the window is definitely encouraging as well. So we can hope that this is one, of course, that that this is the deal that gets done quickly and lifts the mood. One of the things we discussed with my guest on Saturday is kind of the idea that we've known about this deal for so long that in some ways it's kind of lost its shine, lost its sheen. And if this was just breaking today, I think it would be considered a massive, massive deal. But we've known about it for so long that it's kind of taken the spark from it when it is actually a very, very impressive transfer. Gary Jacob of The Telegraph yesterday reported that Arsenal hold an interest in Leroy Sane and potentially signing the player on a free deal as his contract with Bayern Munich expires. But Jacob, of course, reporting in The Telegraph that Arsenal are targeting Sane, who is out of contract in the summer. From a personal point of view, this isn't a deal that would inspire me. I think Harry summed it up pretty well on TalkSport this morning. I think it's the type of deal that you do when you've done your other business. You add it to an already good summer. It's a luxury signing. It's something you'd kind of, spruce up the cake at the end, if you like, cherry on top and all that. When you've done the midfielder, you've done the defender, you've done the centre forward. And of course, it may be that you can only get this type of deal done at the beginning of the window, and that might change. But I'd be surprised if Arsenal signed Leroy Sane, because clearly there is a desire to add players in a wide area. But while Sane might be being contacted or spoken to, or discussions might be taking place, that doesn't mean Arsenal aren't talking to other wingers, because they certainly are. Arsenal have interest in wide players as well this summer, and will be across multiple, as we've discussed on the channel before. We do know that Arsenal's sporting director, Andrea Berta, likes to have a very broad approach when it comes to transfer negotiation discussions and speak to multiple targets. So maybe that is where this story kind of comes from. I've heard nothing myself, but Gary is very well connected. So I have no reason to doubt the information on this front. But when it comes to Leroy Sane, it's a no from me, unless we do a lot of other business and he just adds depth of quality into the team as well. But that's kind of where I'm at on him. But the big story that dropped yesterday is not from Sorry, I'm getting my I'm getting my newspapers around the wrong way. Gary Jacob reporting Leroy Sane story from the Times. I want to just clarify that from the Times. Benjamin Sesko being reported in the Telegraph. Mike McGrath reporting this story yesterday that if Arsenal want to sign Benjamin Sesko, it is going to cost them a figure of around 93 million pounds. That is indeed what it would cost Arsenal to sign the player. Now, that 93 million pound figure of what Mike's reporting, I'm not here to say if people, like Mike are wrong or incorrect, but there's been a lot of discussions around kind of the release clauses and gentlemen's agreements and what the figure could be for Arsenal or any club that wants to sign Sesko. Unsure if this is, of course, including his potential wages as well involved in the transfer. There's a lot of speculation around Sesko, who is expected to move this summer. So we will get an answer to this summer. We will find out if indeed this is an accurate description of the cost of a deal for Benjamin Sesko. 93 million pounds, if we just speak on this for a second as if this is indeed the case, is a lot of money. It's a lot of money. It's still not close to what Alexander Isak would cost, because you're looking at 150 million if you're talking about that figure. If it's not a release clause, it also means Arsenal can, of course, structure a deal and play it in different installments and so on. But I think that what the argument will be is that a player like Victor Gyökeres, who is obviously, you're guaranteed to get goals with him, he can add you quality to the team, as we've discussed on the channel many times, is quite significantly less than Sesko. The belief is that Gyökeres could be signed for around 55, 60 million pounds. So considerably less than the 93 million that is. From a personal point, and I'm a big fan of Benjamin Sesko, and I think that he has been, just on a purely player basis, is the player that I would choose of the two. 93 million pounds is a lot. It's more than I think that he is worth. 93 million pounds is what you pay for a player that is, well, ready. Like, as a 21, 22-year-old, it's the type of money you pay for a player that is going to come in like a Florian Wirtz, effectively, and be already at very young, early 20s, be of a very, very high standing. And Sesko is not a world-class striker yet, but 93 million pounds is what I would expect to pay for a world-class striker. Now, some people might point out the money that Manchester United have paid for Højlund, as an example, who had one season with Atalanta and then signed for Manchester United for 72 million pounds, which is still less than this, but 70 million upwards, you're looking, I think, at paying for a player of a very high caliber still, and that obviously hasn't worked out. Other players have moved for huge, huge fees, and obviously have not been of that point of view. So, yeah, I struggle with the idea of 93 million pounds for Sesko, if indeed this is accurate. I do struggle with that. I'd hope that it wouldn't have costed that much. I would have hoped it was more around the 75, 80 type figure. But when you're going above 90 and you're closing in on 100 million pounds, I mean, that's 100 million euros is what that is. Is what RB Leipzig would be expecting to get for him. I think that's just a little bit too much for my liking, or a personal point of view. But let's wait and see how this transpires. Right, let's go to a quick 10-minute part two. Some of your thoughts and questions right after this. Right, this is part two of today's show, where we're going to be tackling some of your questions, some of your thoughts, theories, queries, and more. So now is the time to throw those into the chat box. So jump them in there now, is what I would say, and I'll try and answer as many of them as I feasibly can. A lot of you are reacting to that story. Manali Cream says 80 million euros for Gyökeres is still too much. Jack says even 75 to 80 million for Sesko is very steep. Amberley says, I think everyone in the Premier League is Man United and is going to pay this much. And that's the problem, is that teams like Chelsea, teams like Man United have inflated prices of players by paying stupid fees for the likes of Anthony, Enzo, Caicedo. They have inflated fees for these players to such an extent that now players like Sesko are costing this much. Mahala Mudryk being another one. Arsenal backed out of that, of course, because they just weren't willing to pay the price. Chelsea were. And when teams vindicate a club's ridiculous value on a player, it means that other clubs can sit there and say, well, if you want him, great, but you're going to have to pay similar to what these other clubs have paid for these types of players. So that's the issue. That's the problem that we've got. That's what Arsenal are dealing with. That's what Arsenal are facing when it comes to these types of transfers. And unfortunately, we have to wait and see. Godric says, Tom, would you take Darwin Nunez at Arsenal? Absolutely not. Daniel says, what do you think of the Athletics report that one of Martinelli and Trossard might need to be sold in order to allow a winger to come in? I think it's more to do with kind of how much costings are of other positions. Arsenal are very active when it comes to kind of a wide player and potentially signing one of those. I think they're open to the idea of one of Trossard and Martinelli leaving only if they get a very good fee. I don't think it would necessarily stop them. I certainly hope that it wouldn't stop them signing a wide player or a versatile attacking player as well. But if that happens to be the case, if they're unsuccessful in bringing in money for the likes of Fabio Vieira, Lokonga, and so on and so forth, then maybe that is what Reece Nelson, maybe that's what needs to happen. But I sincerely hope that's not the case. And of course, I mentioned Reece Nelson there. Could it be that Reece Nelson is included in that winger scenario? Because Reece Nelson is a senior player. Reece Nelson is part of the senior squad. He would come in and, of course, be a part of the team. He would be on the bench. So perhaps his name is also included when talking about the idea of selling a wide player to bring in a wide player. The same as last summer, we had to move on Eddie Nketiah before we could really open up the coffers to spend on a forward. It couldn't happen at the beginning of the window when Sesko was available because we hadn't sold Eddie Nketiah at that point. So it could be that is the case, but I know that Arsenal need to add. I know that Arteta wants to add. He's talked about adding players, not being left short, and replacing a winger does not align with what Arteta has said in any of those press conferences or anything that he has said either. And says, Tom, Sesko is the prize asset. Of course, they're going to price him out or command a significant fee. I can't fault them. I'm not faulting Leipzig at all. Leipzig are well within their rights to ask for this amount of money for Sesko. My issue is with the clubs that have got us to this point, that have paid silly fees for silly players. And they've clearly not been worth that amount of money. You know, Arsenal have been shrewd in their business. You know, think about the deal we got for Jurriën Timber of like less than £40 million for, in my opinion, Europe's best right back last season. Declan Rice, we paid huge money for, but he's vindicated that price tag, £100 million. Had Havertz not got injured last season, he was on for a 20-goal season campaign, which for a £60 million player, going from another Premier League club, it's less than, of course, what Man United played for Højlund and so on and so forth, is outscoring him comfortably. So Arsenal are not one of those teams that have contributed to this ridiculous level of inflation of prices, sadly, and others are far more culpable than we are for that. Jonga says, good morning, Tom. Why does this window already feel like a letdown? I don't know, Jonga. It shouldn't. It's probably social media, mate. It's probably the people you're following or watching. We're in the 29th of May. The window's not even open yet. And some people are calling it a disappointment, saying that feels like nothing's going to happen. Arsenal are literally about to bring in the best number 6 on the market. So I'm a little lost for clarity on how on earth people can think this window is already going to be a letdown when they're about to sign a £51 million midfielder who is the best in his position available on the market. So I'm struggling with anybody who thinks that. I think that's more a you problem, to be honest, to put it bluntly. Certainly more a you problem than an us problem. Wilson says, I'd rather get Gyökeres over Sesko because the price is more reasonable. He's proven and is a proper goal scorer. Christopher says, we need to all calm down. The window is not even open yet. And Jerome says, the window can't be a letdown if it's not even open yet. S says, I've just skipped over that. I'll come back to 30. S says, we shouldn't be comparing Havertz to United flops to justify his price. No, I'm not saying it's a justification of his price. I think Havertz's own performance have justified what we paid for him, if indeed he was tracking towards a 20-goal season before he got his injury. So I've got no issue. He was our centre-forward and key starter in a record-breaking season in 23-24. So I have no issue in Arsenal signing of Havertz whatsoever. 35 says, are we renewing Sambi Lokonga's contract? Can he be a squad player? I think they're activating the extra year in his deal, but I think that's only because of wanting to get a transfer fee for him this summer. I think that's the only reason why they're activating the 1-year option in his contract. Soup says RB will be desperate to come the end of the RB will be desperate come the end of the window. And he will probably end up somewhere like Aston Villa for 50 million, but we haven't got time to wait around. We need to move. Bobby says it's not about Sesko or Gyökeres, it's about timings. It's a late night show price. If you waste time for signing a striker for 3 years, all the clubs will sell their mid to level strikers. I mean, he's not a mid-level striker, that's for sure. Cyrus says Sesko will be a great player very soon. If not because of the price, I wouldn't mind signing both him and Gyökeres. Again, the idea of signing both is not going to happen. People really need to get that out of their minds. It's not possible. And Jack says, what do you make of James McNicholas reporting that Havertz will be a likely starter next season, no matter who we sign? I don't think that's a wild claim at all. We tend to, gradually bed in new signings. We don't tend to start them from the off unless they're like a Declan Rice figure or there's a glaring gap. Kai Havertz is still incredibly highly appreciated at Arsenal. He, as we've already talked about, was tracking towards a 20-goal season. And as I've mentioned before, I personally don't think Sesko and Gyökeres are really significant upgrades on Kai Havertz at centre forward. I really don't see them as being the significant upgrades on that position. They're just the best options that are out there this summer. And that, again, we've talked about how the centre-forward market is not particularly forthcoming with options again. And it sucks because we desperately need that player. But the player that is, which we all know who it is, and that's Alexander Isak, is just not accessible during this window. And that's what I fear with Sesko as well. I fear that we repeat our Isak mistake when he was at Real Sociedad with Sesko. I really do fear that. I just don't see it. And it says, what about Osimhen? I've gone back and forth around the Osimhen. Osimhen has had one really good season in a top 5 European league, which was the season Napoli won the league. Outside of that, his numbers are not particularly tracking any better than what we already have. The off-field stuff, the wages, of course, as well. It's just not for me. I go around in circles with Osimhen. People ask this question despite the fact they know I've said it a million times. Mad says Alexander Isak is the one that we need to win the league. Unfortunately, just doesn't seem to be feasible. AJ says, Tom, I picked Gyökeres a long time ago. The price tag just makes me feel Arteta needs to move on from Sesko. That money gives us Gyökeres and maybe Lookman. I mean, it doesn't. You don't sign Lookman and Gyökeres for 90 million. You're not getting Lookman for 30 million quid, mate. I'm sorry, but Lookman's still going to cost you at least 50, 60, potentially more, I think. Atalanta, yes, there's an issue with the situation in the squad, but I still don't see them selling him for 30 million. I don't think that's realistic at all. But thank you for the kind donation. So, yeah. Is there any news on Osimhen saying that he's moving to Saudi Arabia? Al Hilal have eyed up Osimhen move ahead of Club World Cup. They're looking to sign him for 40 million euros. I mean, that's not an expensive price tag, is it? Really, for a player of Osimhen's actual quality. I'm not saying he's a bad centre forward, so he's just not for me. But I think that tells you something about the wage demands of Osimhen as well. So that he's going to Saudi, that he's playing obviously already in Turkey. That's why Chelsea pulled out of a deal on deadline day last summer. The wages side of things were just getting out of control, as we talked about. But that's kind of where we're at. I did obviously mention that this was going to be a short show. That's why we started the show early this morning. Thank you so much to all of you for listening and watching. It is greatly appreciated. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning for a live show, the last live show before I go away this weekend on this Stag Do. But as mentioned, there will be shows going live for you at 8 a.m. on Saturday and on Sunday. So do look out for those when they drop. Thank you for listening. Have a good Thursday. Enjoy yourselves. It's a very decent day of the week. It means you're only a day away from Friday. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.